You've been a leader essentially your entire life. I mean, you were an Eagle Scout, then you were a leader in the Corps of Cadets at A&M, then you were in the military, and you've been a leader basically your entire adult life. So I want to ask you a question kind of right out of the gates, and that is, where do you think that your passion, your drive to succeed, your drive to be a leader, where does that come from for you fundamentally?
Brian, for me, I was really fortunate. My dad was also a fighter pilot, and similar to your dad, he was at the very end of his career, and then retired from the military. And he instilled in me just a sense of purpose and a sense of leading a life that is purpose driven, that is based on a strict code of ethics and morals. And really, some kids, their heroes when we were growing up were, basketball players or baseball players or football players, you name it. But for me, my hero was my dad. And really, who I am today, I trace all the way back to how he raised me as a young man. And unfortunately, he passed away right before I went to Texas A&M. So in the summer in between my senior year in high school, my freshman year in college, my father passed away. But I credit him, and then obviously my mom too, because it takes more than one individual there who really fostered in me this drive and this, what I would call a purpose-driven life. My dad would wake up every day and say, each day is a day in which to excel. And my mom and I still joke about, he had all these little sayings and colloquialisms, very similar to Will Jenkins, who we both know.
Sure.
But yeah, that was my dad. Every day was a day in which to excel and a new day in which to excel. And so I've used that as kind of my guiding light, if you will, throughout my life. And it's worked out so far.
John, or Colonel, I'm sorry. I may occasionally slip back and forth. I hope that's okay. But Colonel, I'm the same exact way. My dad has always been my hero, primarily because he raised me and my younger brother, and my adopted older brother, as a single father. My mom died when I was 10. My dad was, I think, a major in the Air Force at the time. And he essentially had to set his career aside a little bit. He in other words, there were certain things in the military that he could not do because it would take him away from his two boys too long. So he raised us while also serving in the military for 20 years. And so he's always been my hero too, and given me a lot of lessons. But, your dad was you literally followed in his footsteps. I mean, he was a combat pilot in Vietnam. What kind of planes did he fly over there?
He did. So he was significantly older, Brian. So he was actually in the Korean War and flew the F-86s at the very end of the Korean War. And then he did 2 tours in Vietnam as an OV-10 pilot, which the primary mission set of that aircraft was the forward air controller mission, and calling in the close air support strikes from the fast movers, if you will. And so when they were they're in the initial stages of Vietnam, and then as it continued to mature, they were taking older, more experienced combat aviators from like the Korean War, et cetera, and putting them in the OV-10, which was the predecessor to today's A-10 Thunderbolt, the tank killer. But yeah, so really unique opportunity. There's so many things that I'd love to go back and ask him now. Now that I know about fighter aviation and flying and having been in combat, et cetera, there's so many questions that I would love to go back and ask him, and probably some similar experiences that he had that nobody else in the family could necessarily relate to, but I could. And I don't know, and maybe my family's a little bit unique, but my brother-in-law was a fighter pilot. He was an F-15C model driver, and then my dad's brother was also a Marine Corps fighter pilot. And so I don't know, just we have a lot of aviators in my family. Yeah. So I guess once I decided I didn't want to be a garbage man, then, dad's flying planes a little bit cooler than riding in the back of a garbage truck. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Yeah. But yeah, and here I am. So.
Well, it's almost like the family business is flying fighter jets. I mean,
yeah,
really, exactly. What a cool family business. Well, Colonel, when I was born, my dad was actually stationed. My dad was a SAC Strategic Air Command, Bay-52 navigator and bombardier. He flew 200 combat missions over Vietnam, but he was actually stationed on the Guam Islands flying combat sorties. I don't know if that's the right term, combat missions over Vietnam when I was born. So I didn't even see my father until I was 6 months old. But one of the neat stories, I have a little bit of a similar story, kind of, in that my mother was also in the Air Force. She was a nurse. My grandfather was in the Army Air Corps, and then it became the Air Force. So he was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And then my mom's brother was a chief master sergeant in the Air Force, and he worked in Air Force intelligence. And when my dad was flying missions, this is super cool, over Vietnam, my uncle knew when he returned safely, and he would write letters or call my mother and say, hey, Ed got home safely. And I've actually got copies of some of those letters. It's really incredible to look back on and to imagine, what it was like. And you've served multiple combat tours as a fighter pilot. And I want to hear a little bit about that. But before we get into some of your military experience, some of your pilot experience, some of the Thunderbird experience, do you mind telling us a little bit about where you come from, a little bit about your background, so people can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure, Brian. So, I was originally born in Louisiana, and then my family got to Texas as fast as they could.
Can I interrupt you just real quick? Did you happen to be born at Barksdale Air Force Base?
I was actually born in Bossier City.
Yeah, I was born in Bossier City too. I was born in Barksdale Air Force Base. Wow, what a small world.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
well, sorry to interrupt you. That's super neat, though. That's super neat.
Yeah, no. So, my family, they relocated to Texas, and so I did 2 years at Spring High School there, just outside of Houston, and then my last 2 years, my junior and senior year at Conroe High School. And as you alluded to earlier, I was a Boy Scout, and then I finished that pretty early in my high school career.
Not just a Boy Scout, you were an Eagle Scout.
Yes, yeah. So did that, and then transitioned to athletics. I think, like most folks do, as you get a little bit older, and played football and ran some track, and other than that, just had a good time. And as I was getting towards the end of my junior year and into my senior year in high school, my dad had always talked about Texas A&M, and I really didn't have much SA, but when my dad was first in the Air Force, he was an instructor pilot out at Old Bryan Airfield there.
Sure.
And at the time, the Corps was so big that the freshman cadets lived out at Bryan Airfield. And my dad talked about how respectful the cadets were, because they would hitchhike into town, and my dad and his fighter pilot buddies would take them into Bryan so they could go to the bar and do whatnot. So,
Nice.
So that was kind of my introduction to Texas A&M. And then I went to spend the night with the Corps, and the rest is history. But that was kind of my high school adventure, if you will, was, like I said, the Eagle Scouts, and then the athletics, and then was lucky enough to get accepted to Texas A&M, and really have never looked back.
Nice. Well, I tell people nowadays, Colonel, that, I own a business where I have to hire and fire people, and there are certain things I look for on a resume. And if somebody was an Eagle Scout or played sports, any kind of competitive sports, that gives them a huge leg up in getting an interview at my job. So, or at my workplace. So when we were there, Colonel, when were you at A&M roughly? Give us kind of the time frame you were there.
Yeah, so I was there from 94 to 98.
So I was there from 91 to 96. So we kind of crossed paths a little bit. And I actually was the wing commander my senior year in the Corps. I did not take an Air Force contract, but I had a lot of friends that wanted Air Force contracts. Quite a few that ended up getting them. Colonel Urasek, who you probably know, Neil Sharon, who you may know as well. He was an A-10 pilot. Mm-hmm. But back at the time, they weren't handing out pilot slots in the Air Force. I mean, it was not a foregone conclusion that you would get a pilot slot by any stretch of the imagination. So when you went to A&M, Colonel, did you already know at the time that you wanted to fly jets?
I did, Brian. And so I was lucky in the sense that I applied for and received the Air Force ROTC scholarship.
Nice.
And so you could pretty much go, a whole litany of schools would take it. But, I took mine to Texas A&M. And so the answer to your question is yes, I absolutely went to the Corps of Cadets knowing I wanted to be in the Air Force and knowing that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That's, I wanted to follow my dad's footsteps. And that was really, what I had my goals set on.